Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to everyone gathered here. I'm Swati, Program Director of Aspen. I'm here on behalf of Kiran Pasricha, our Executive Director and CEO. She's indisposed today. She couldn't be here. She sends her apologies. Aspen and ICRIER have come together today for the launch of the report BIT and Beyond, Advancing India-US Economic Relations. The session will be chaired by Ambassador Ronen Sen. Ambassador Ronen Sen has been our ambassador to Mexico, Russia, Germany, and USA. He's the only Indian so far to serve as the ambassador to 4 G8 countries, including 3 P5 capitals. He's had a number of assignments as special or personal envoy of the Prime Minister for meetings with the heads of state. Ambassador Sen will be taking over. Over to you, Ambassador Sen. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and I congratulate Aspen India and ICRIER for taking this initiative. Very timely initiative, I must say, just immediately after the inauguration of President Obama, second inauguration, to have this gathering and the discussion on India-US relations, and that too focused on the economic aspect of the relationship, which requires particular attention, and it's a vital component, a vital foundation of any long-term relationship, let alone India's most important relationship and most diversified relationship. And Ambassador Hemant Krishan Singh has prepared a report which, without any further ado, I'd like to request him to present. But just before that, I would like to say that that it's good to see Ambassador Nancy Powell with us. She's landed running when she arrived here in April. Immediately after that, a lot of activities. But this event is very, very special because today we have the honor to have in our midst our Minister of External Affairs, Mr. Salman Khurshid, who really needs no introduction. But his presence itself is the best manifestation you can have of the priority which India attaches to this relationship. So without any further ado, Hemant, I request you to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Salman Khurshid, Ambassador Nancy Powell, our Chair for this evening, Ambassador Ronen Sen, and my colleague from ICRIER, Rajat Kathuria. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, let me begin by just a quick word of thanks to Aspen India and to Kiran, who we are missing today because she's indisposed, for partnering us this evening for the launch of this BIT and Beyond report. I'd like to also thank my colleagues at ICRIER. Rajat is here, but very particularly I'd like to thank Tinsy Sarah Solomon. Tinsy, please stand up. She's my contributing author, and she's done a lot of spade work and research. Quite obviously, this is a long report, so I do not pretend that I will go through every aspect of it. I'll try to trace for you the basic DNA of the report in 6 segments. The first is the backdrop. The second is the current trends. Third are the constraints, then mentioning some remedies, and putting forward a roadmap for a BIT and Beyond approach. And finally, some conclusions, especially those which I hope the Minister will heed. To begin with the backdrop, basically, India is now poised to possibly emerge as an economic powerhouse by 2030. so says the US National Investment Council's latest report on Global Trends 2030. This is obviously not preordained. It depends on addressing many challenges which we face. But an immediate one which we face is emerging from the current macroeconomic imbalances, the low growth and the lagging investment cycle into which we are currently placed. This is a strategic imperative, I would add. It's also linked to our future security. So this is the first of the backdrops. The second is the last 6 months have seen an amazing number of reaffirmations by the United States about the importance of India's emergence as a global power for the US. These have included Secretary Clinton saying that US has placed a strategic bet on India. NSA Donnellan has said that the US extends a full embrace of India's rise. And Secretary Panetta has called India the linchpin of the US pivot. So these two really must drive us into thinking new ways how to advance our economic relations. The third of the backdrops, which is unusual, you might question why I'm using it, but anyway, we'll come to that later, is that trade liberalization is increasingly taking place outside the WTO through regional trade agreements. An estimated 80% of all rules that regulate the functioning of world markets are today accounted for by the preferential trade agreements entered into by the US and the European Union. India really needs now to raise its involvement and ambition on FTAs. With that, turn to the trends. Trends are good. India-US relations. Cumulatively, the US is India's largest economic partner for trade, investment, jobs, and technology. So that in democracies is extremely important. Our trade has already exceeded 100 billion if you take both services and goods. The trade grew an amazing 30.59% in 2011-12, which is virtually the same as the growth of trade between India and its recent FTA or CEPA partners, which is amazingly good, as I said. $500 billion of bilateral trade by 2020 is distinctly possible. Next, the US is a major investor in India, but in talking about the US as the 5th largest investor, we forget that over a 5-year cycle from 2007 to 2011, the US is the leading investor in terms of number of projects and number of jobs created, some 355,000 jobs in that period. Similarly, India's investments in the US are comparable, they're growing. If you take M&A acquisitions and greenfield investments together, they are really possibly more than $20 billion. The technology sector alone supports a total of around 280,000 jobs in the United States. So overall, to use an American statistic, in President Obama's first term, US investment in India up 30%, Indian investment in the US up 40%. The absence of a BIT is quite an anomaly. And it will certainly, if we are able to conclude a BIT, it will certainly help expand trade and investment, including in key areas like infrastructure. Now, the constraints. Let me mention 3 general constraints and 3 specific constraints. First is that as large and vigorous democracies, both tend to seek liberal market access abroad while practicing their respective forms of protectionism at home. Second, both currently face the urgency of undertaking economic reforms and domestic political gridlock. And third, and this is important, we do need to take into account that all this said, there are large disparities between the two. India is still struggling to develop and does not quite, has a long way to go before it can enjoy the kind of widespread prosperity which the US offers its citizens. Specific constraints, there are 3, 2 from India's side, 1 bilateral. From India's side, first is the setbacks to India's investment climate, stalled reforms, regulatory uncertainty, and draconian tax measures. That's the first. The second, Symbol and symptom of this adverse scenario is the FDI in multi-brand retail with opt-outs for states. Again, that is a recipe for continuing uncertainty. On the bilateral side, I think there's just one which I need to mention. India does not figure at all in the USTR's trade agenda. The trade policy forum between the two countries has not even met since 2010. Some remedies I'd like to mention. First, from the Indian side, India has already embraced globalization for the benefits it brings and now needs to align its domestic policies with the open global economic order it propagates abroad. Second, after a couple of decades of what I term politically constrained liberalization, it is time for India to give a definitive direction to its economic policy. And I mention here just one particular area. There's a major need to liberalize FDI in a host of sectors. I will mention only one sector, which is the defense sector. FDI in defense can have a much greater impact on India's technological prowess, high-end manufacturing, and strategic autonomy than FDI in retail. We should be considering it. Some would say, what happens to the national aspect and the domestic economy, etc. In areas where we have allowed 100% FDI, like IT, oil and gas, and automotive, it's clear that Indian companies are world leaders. So, I mean, there is something to think about from that experience. Outlook for any of these remedies being applied, I think the government now fully recognizes that there is an urgent need for reform. But I think with elections coming up next year, it remains to be seen how many of these reforms will be undertaken in 2013. Let me now move on to the roadmap for BIT and beyond. First is that certainly the BIPA, BIT negotiations on which we've just had preliminary contacts so far should be fast-tracked during this year. The US BIT model has been renewed. Its objectives are quite clear: market openness, protection of investments, and enforcement of rights. India, on the other hand, is undertaking a review because of recent investor-state arbitration cases, concerns like treaty shopping, and broad provisions like fair and equitable treatment. So I have three recommendations to the Indian side or to our government as they consider what they need to do about future BIPAs. First is that the investor-state arbitration function is essential to BITs, and taking it away will severely undermine India's investment climate. Second is that what is more important is to establish the predictability of India's regulatory and taxation regime, and to remember that all host state regulatory functions fall under the ambit of BITs unless specifically excluded. Third, that as DEA and Department of Economic Affairs and DIPP coordinate our eventual review of BIPAs, we should be able to craft an investment-friendly regime, investor protection, and regulatory space for the needs of a developing economy in a harmonious balance. That's the challenge for our own side. Now, there are Indian concerns about the US BIT model, and we've examined all of them in the report. On pre-establishment rules, of course, accepting a blanket provision is not likely at all. But India's recent CEPAs do contain more restrictive provisions for national treatment, and I think that's the way things will go. Second area of concern is intellectual property rights. One area which will come up when we negotiate a BIT would be preserving room for low-cost, life-saving generics in India. I think that the solution will have to be found within the TRIPS compliance which India promises and strengthened IPR enforcement in India. Labor and environment clauses in the US BIT model are not under ISDS or ISA enforcement, so I do not foresee a problem in that area. Prohibitions against performance requirements, again, middle ground is possible on the basis of India's CEPAs with Japan and other countries. Conclusion on this is that the BIT is doable, but will certainly require flexibility, pragmatic adjustments, and a customized BIT model is likely to emerge. Beyond the BIT, as India moves forward with this element of our economic architecture building and our own economic liberalization progresses, we recommend that both sides should prepare the ground for a future FTA. Completion of the India-EU BTIA should provide an incentive for the US. The expected launch of a US-EU FTA should provide an incentive for India. Business sectors of both India and the United States are generally likely to be positive towards an India-US FTA. As part of India's preparation on this side, I have a few recommendations. First, we must examine what kind of FTAs we have signed, because they are lagging behind in quality and they are lagging behind in utilization. The India-ASEAN FTA provides only 73.8% tariff liberalization, which is the lowest of all ASEAN plus one FTAs. Only 17.9% of India's trade is with FTA partners, as against 38.8% for the US and 73.8% for Europe. In order to enhance India's role in shaping the rules of globalization, the government should study the costs and benefits of advanced FTAs. It should also consider how developed countries deal with advanced FTAs through trade adjustment programs and safety nets, and implement these before we undertake any such FTAs. Domestic reform, it is the contention of the authors that domestic reforms plus greater harmonization with global markets will yield major welfare gains for India's economy. Of course, there is a caveat there that on both sides, we need to generate public support for trade liberalization. Final 3 points before I come to conclusions. On Asian economic architecture, it's clear that the 10+6 RCEP is looking increasingly attractive. Studies done on the welfare gains show that India's economy could gain as much as 3.4% of GDP from a 10+6 RCEP. However, India may have joined these negotiations, but will face major difficulties because of China's domination within RCEP. Comparatively, the TPP, which the US has launched with 11 countries, will yield lower welfare gains for the US itself, just 0.1% of GDP. The recommendation here is that there is a patchwork emerging of FTAs in Asia. And as it emerges, India and the US should intensify dialogue on regional economic architecture. India certainly requires to remain open to the TPP. And if I may say, the US needs to remain open to an FTA with ASEAN. Other issues, there are two. One is what you would probably expect me to at least mention, which is the visa issues and the IT sector issues, and the other is related to our bilateral engagement. First is reviving the Trade Policy Forum and restoring cooperation at the WTO. This is a difficult challenge. And all I can say is that our Commerce and Industry Minister has repeatedly come out in favor of liberalization. I think all these messages need to reach Geneva, and we await a new USTR, and hopefully we can put the TPF back on track. As far as the finding accommodation on the IT sector, IT services sector is concerned, this is a two-way street. Let's make no mistake about it. Technology and innovation-driven Indian IT services for the US market are the highest end of India-US collaboration on the economic side. And 62% of our market is just the United States. And not just the market, but the kind of tie-ups which our companies have with American companies for vending these services worldwide, those are unmatched with any other relationship which we may have. So yes, this is an extremely positive part of our relationship. Outsourcing as a phenomenon is both a revalidation of globalization and a challenge. A reverse cycle is already underway. You see that from GE's decisions to move work back to the United States. Also on cost differential, by 2015, the cost differential will be just about 20% between hiring people in the United States and hiring people in India. So while the US needs to certainly move and address concerns on visa issues and totalization, India also needs to move towards more commercial presence-based or Mode 3, WTO Mode 3 based business models if it wishes to become a true services superpower. Now, my 4 conclusions from our research. First, of course, I must say that because of domestic political constraints in both countries, we cannot predict a time frame for progressing this roadmap. A new team in the Obama administration is obviously awaited, and we'll have to see. But while the continuity is provided by President Obama's return to the White House, we need to be a little bit realistic. And the first part of the realism is that the BIT must be and has to be the first step, first major step towards building an architecture of bilateral economic agreements. FTA is much more in the distant future, but steps can be taken on both sides to start working towards that in the long term. The third conclusion is that this year, economic relations must be given the highest priority in the bilateral agenda through close, high-level political direction. And the final recommendation is that this year's India-US strategic dialogue, which Minister Khurshid will host around about the middle of the year, can consider concretizing a long-term BIT and beyond roadmap, preferably through a separate joint statement. I leave that thought with you, Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you,